Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome today's afternoon session as part of the Leadership Summit. Today, we're about to host a really fun conversation about steps and pathways to entrepreneurship. My name is Arvind Gopal Ratnam. I'm going to be your moderator for today. We've got some amazing panelists who are going to tell you a little bit more about themselves in a minute. But they represent a really amazing group of individuals who have, at some way, path or another, have found their way through Wisconsin, but are based in all different parts of our country, doing amazing work, representing the diverse and underrepresented population that exists within us. And so, real quickly about myself, a little bit, I work for the Milwaukee Bucks as my day job. I lead the community efforts and social responsibility efforts for the Milwaukee Bucks. So first and foremost, thank you to Henry Sanders and the team for allowing me and our organization a chance to be a part of these conversations, because at the Bucks, we're really taking a strong effort to think about how our entire organization can really continue to help support and empower small business owners and entrepreneurs that are representing our Black and Brown and all of our diverse communities across the state of Wisconsin. So to be a part of this conversation is also incredibly educational for me too. So, all right, on to the program. Let's hear from our experts a little bit more and less from me. So for the next hour or so, we're going to just kind of talk to our three experts, followed by a little bit of Q&A. So at any point, please submit some questions through the chat. We'll get them going in here as the conversation allows. So without further ado, first introduction, I'd like to pass it over to Bill Sargent to introduce himself.
Well, thank you, Arvind. It's a pleasure to be here. I want to applaud the work that you and your team and Henry Madison 365 is doing to create this forum. I'm Winslow Sargent. My background, I grew up in Boston, Massachusetts, trained as an engineer. I got my undergrad, a BS in electrical engineering, did a master's also in EE at Iowa State. And then I made my way to Madison, Wisconsin, where I did a PhD. And I became a Badger and fell in love with the Madison community. And since then, I've gone on to work with some large companies, the IBMs, the AT&Ts of the world. But I also have started companies. Many years ago, I co-founded a technology company and we got some venture capital funding to start the company. And 2.5 years later, lightning struck. I think it was acquired at that time for about $900 million. And so that's not the norm. The first time that you start a company, lightning doesn't strike like that. But in this case, it did. And so, of course, once that happens, it changes your career in terms of what you can do and what you want to do. And so from that point on, I changed my focus from being a chip designer at the time to more helping companies grow and build. And so I spent some time at the National Science Foundation with the SBIR program. Later, I moved my family from the Washington, D.C. area to Madison, where I was a venture capitalist from 2005 to 2009. Then I got involved with the first Obama campaign when he was running for president, and he won. And I was asked to serve as chief counsel for advocacy at the U.S. Small Business Administration, where I was a direct report to the president, and I had to be Senate confirmed. And so after a brutal confirmation and being filibustered for a year, I got a recess appointment, and I finally got in. I was nominated in 2009, but I got in the office itself in 2010, just because of the process. And so from 2010 to 2015, my role within government was the chief advocate for small business, where I had a great group of attorneys and advocates and economists whose job was to represent small businesses before the White House, before the courts, before federal agencies. And one of them was Henry Sanders. He represented the upper Midwest, and he did a wonderful job of being the voice of small business. And so I did that from 2010 to 2015. I left in 2015. Now I am the incoming chair for the International Council for Small Business, and where I work on advising governments on how to build an ecosystem for their citizens to create companies and grow. And so I'm also I still serve on various boards. I serve on the board of WARF. I am on the board of trustees for the Mortgage Institute for Research. I'm on the board of trustees for Northeastern Universities, and I serve as executive chair for a few companies. One in particular is Hilux, which is a beverage company that's doing well. And so that's a little bit about my background, and I'm pleased. I'm looking forward to the dialogue.
Thanks, Winslow. Appreciate that. Israel, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, I second what Winslow said, and thank you for everything that Madison 365 is doing. And as a Milwaukee native, Arvin, what the Bucks have done with the new ownership over the last few years is amazing. And re-signing Giannis, heck yeah, way to go with that. And to Winslow, as someone in the Wisconsin ecosystem, thank you for doing everything you've done, because you paved the way for a lot of us. You've made things easier to a certain extent in a lot of realms, whether it's on the entrepreneurship side or the VC side, which I've been at both. So a little bit about myself. I'm from Milwaukee, went out to a D2 school in Minnesota on a football scholarship, came back to Madison for law school, practiced M&A and securities law for a few years while building tech companies on the side. A little bit crazy to do so, but I was successful somehow in doing so. Built a computer vision photo and video recognition technology that did well in China, built a few different mobile apps, one of them that's still doing well that we started with a few NFL players, raised decent amount of money in VC capital for two companies. And then from there, I've now transferred over and I'm the director of the Equity League over here at Titletown Tech. So the Equity League is a VC fund where we've partnered with the Packers, Bucks, Brewers, and Microsoft. We're investing in pre-seed to Series A companies, minority-owned companies, and or double bottom line impact-focused companies, looking to make our first investment here soon. But yeah, it's been great from Wisconsin, making moves. Hopefully in a little while, at some point, someone's looking at me the same way I'm looking at you, Winslow.
Thanks, Israel. Appreciate that, and appreciate the kind of words about the Bucks. And I'm excited for you to share a little bit in the future about some of the work that the Bucks are doing as part of this Equity League. So, welcome. And Zach, please introduce yourself.
Yeah. So, hello everyone. My name is Zach Ellis. I'm originally from New Orleans, Louisiana. Never thought I'd ever find myself in the state of Wisconsin, but I'll get to that part in a second. But born and raised in New Orleans, got my bachelor's degree from the U.S. Naval Academy. Served 7 years active duty on these things you see behind me. As I transitioned out of the military, I was keen to go into an area of business that I thought would be as impactful in the private sector as serving in the military. And for me, that started out in the healthcare space. I went to work for a health insurance company in Louisville, Kentucky, of all places, called Humana. It's a large health insurer. Quickly found out that health insurance and healthcare aren't necessarily the same thing. And so began sort of looking for, more interesting opportunities and ways to sort of tap into other interests of mine, and found myself partnering with the innovation department of Humana, which took me on an expat assignment. I spent almost a year in London, England, working with the with the NHS, the National Health Service of the UK, trying to figure out how socialized healthcare works. But that was how I got introduced to video games for improving health, and unique investments to drive technology and build companies. And that planted the seed with me that didn't leave. And that seed stuck with me for the next sort of 3 years as I found myself in Washington, D.C., engaged to a woman who was in graduate school at the University of Wisconsin. And I had just sat in on a panel on investing, most of the panelists were real estate investors. And there was one lone investor who was a former physician who had become a private equity and venture capital investor. And kind of to Winslow's point, lightning struck. I was inspired. I saw the connection between everything I had been doing in consulting and innovation and healthcare and how it all could kind of come together. And because I knew I was moving to Madison within the next year, I was excitedly looking for opportunities to work with venture funds in and around the Madison area. There weren't a lot of corporate opportunities. So I just started digging around and looking for opportunities to network. And one day I found this venture fund that amongst its 5 or 6 partners had one African-American partner. And I excitedly called my fiance at the time and said, hey, there's a VC fund in Madison. There's a Black guy who works there. I'm really excited. I'm going to find a way to meet this guy. And she's like, yeah, I think I know who you're talking about. Is his name Winslow? I think he goes to my church. And so, that began the path to me meeting Winslow. Ironically, this was 2010, and he had just moved or was in the process of moving to DC. And so during my last 12 months in DC, I got to know Winslow pretty well. He suggested that I explore opportunities at places like Wharf and University Tech Transfer as an opportunity to learn more about technology and use that as an entree into the venture capital world and as a means of differentiating myself. And he said, look, you're going to spend the next X amount of years in Madison. You can either one way or another, that time is going to pass. So you can either make the most of that time by getting involved with the university and attaining a degree and getting involved in various elements of the community, or you can let that time pass and not do those things. And so that kind of also stuck with me. So I ended up getting a master's degree in biotechnology from UW. I ended up working at Wharf and getting involved in a number of entrepreneurial endeavors. I invested into startups that were spun out of the university. I helped start the Upstart program, which is an entrepreneurship program, 12-week program that's hosted out of Wharf, and a number of other things. So long story short, I went from Wisconsin to PepsiCo, and I was able to join their corporate venture team based on my experience at Wisconsin, and then got recruited from there to Ohio State. But I was still loyal to the Badgers whenever they would play one another. And more recently, I've now transitioned to being a CEO and managing director of a venture fund in Houston, Texas. It's called the HTX Impact Fund. At least that's the placeholder name for now. And that fund, it's an early stage venture fund investing in the Black and Brown founders innovating technologies in the Southeastern United States.
Appreciate that, Zach. Thank you. Welcome. And thanks to you as well, Israel, Winslow, for those backgrounds. You guys are amazing, amazing accomplishments. An hour does not do enough time to allow you guys the opportunity to truly tell some of your stories and give some really impactful advice. So please, I think I speak for all of us in saying, let's find more opportunities for you guys to continue to be out here and sharing your stories. So let's keep going. I don't want to take too many steps back, but I think to put it into perspective, I think our audience is made of those who are aspiring to be entrepreneurs as well as those who are currently entrepreneurs, right? So from the scope of that perspective, right, let's start maybe at the beginning a little bit. Winslow and Zach both referenced the lightning in the bottle moment, or when lightning struck, when lightning strikes is specifically what you said. And so all three of you started on your paths to entrepreneurship somewhere. How did you start? And can you talk about not only what it took for you to start, but what it required you to ask of those around you in order to start? Because I think sometimes we forget about asking for that help right away, at least from the world I've been in. And so I'd love for you to maybe comment on that. And Winslow, maybe I'll start with you. If you could talk a little bit about where your path started very specifically and kind of how that led you on your way.
Well, when I think of entrepreneurship and when I look back at my history, I guess that it actually started when I was very, very young. And I didn't realize, I guess the term being an entrepreneur wasn't something that I knew, or it wasn't thrown around. But I can remember when I was about 12 years of age, I wanted to find a job. I wanted to work. And because I just want to say that I'm doing something, and, I wanted to be productive. And so I remember going to a kennel where they were training dogs. And I told the owner, I said, you don't have to pay me, but I'll come in here and clean because I want to go back to my neighborhood to tell them that I have a job. And sure enough, he allowed me to be there. But I wanted to be active. Now, a year and a half later, at the time in Boston, to work a job, you had to be 14, like to work a summer jobs. And I still wasn't 14. So I found out that you could sell firecrackers and do pretty well. So I went down to a part of town where they were selling these fireworks, where I bought a brick of firecrackers for $3 and I sold a pack for 25 cents each, basically, and made $10. So I turned $3 into $10. And so I referenced that in terms of I didn't let my circumstance or my age or what was going on stop me, confine me from being creative. And so likewise, as I got older, I consciously made the decision to get as much education as I could, because I remember, just coming home on the bus and I would hear people talk about their supervisor and how the supervisor was doing this and the supervisor was doing that. And they were basically, they were slaves to those jobs. And so they were waiting 20 plus years before they could retire. And what I learned is that if the supervisor had a good day, you had a good day. But if the supervisor didn't have a good day, you were in a world of trouble. So at a very young age, I said, well, I'm going to get as much education as possible. So that will allow me to go out and take chances, because in case things don't work out, I can always land on my feet and find a job and feed my family. So that's why that brought me to do a BS, an MS, and a PhD, because I wanted to, as it were, to raise my floor. I didn't believe that I had a ceiling, but I did have a floor. So I was trying to raise my floor as high as possible. So the furthest that I can fall is my floor. And with an education, that allowed me to take chances to go out and start companies. So one of the first companies that I left and started was a technology company. And I could do so because I felt that if this doesn't work out, I have an education to fall back on. I can feed my family. And of course, and I know that it was temporary, because even if it didn't work out, I could always find something, get myself together, but I'm going to go right back out, because it's almost like as they say, a moth to a flame. I'm prone to try things, even though I know that I'm going to look back at it and says, well, why am I starting this company? Why am I getting into this stuff? It's because I feel like I have to be challenged. And so that's kind of my drive, to start companies. Of course, I want to be successful, but I want to go as far as I can go.
I love that. Zach or Israel, would either of you want to talk about your start, your path, and how that began?
I'll let Israel go first.
Thanks, Zach. For me, I think I describe it as learning the rules of the game. And by that, for me, it came in two forms. So when I first decided I wanted to start my first company, I was in law school, and it was, well, what does that mean? What does starting a company mean? What does getting entrepreneurship mean? Do I need mentors? Do I need to, what does it look like? So it was understanding like the operational rules, like how do you structure a company? If I do get money, who should be my first hires? Like how do I even build it out from an operational standpoint? And that's kind of correlated to how my mind works in general, but I needed to understand the rules, because once I understood the rules, then I could play, and then I could start making moves. And when I made the transformation into becoming a tech entrepreneur, I was kind of lucky. I had someone that took my original idea and was like, hey, you need to develop software around this. And this was 2010. And, I'll be fully transparent. I think my answer was like, you mean like a website? Like, what do you mean? And I was like, what does that look like? And this particular guy, he's still CEO of a development firm. And he walked me through step by step, like how to design a technology product, and then subsequently created my first technology product, software behind my first startup. And to learn that, and I think from that point on, I was able to look at innovation through a technology lens. So I'm learning the rules of the game in terms of how to design operationally any business, then how to design a technology business. And for me, the last kind of, well, maybe not the last tier, but the next tier in my kind of conception phase of becoming an entrepreneur was, all right, so if I want to play in this VC game, what does that look like to raise capital? And I went and made like a couple pitches and quickly realized I have no idea what I'm doing. You got to get a pitch deck together. There's a game to be played and there's rules to that game. So I decided that I wanted to, before I went full tech entrepreneur, I want to spend a few years as an attorney, get the transactional experience. So I spent a few years doing M&A securities law, working for these tech entrepreneurs. I got to over $1 billion in transactional experience. Now I felt like I knew the rules of the game, kind of had a cheat code a little bit. So when I got out there, it's like, all right, this is what VCs are expecting. This is what they're looking for. And then as a minority founder, as a Latino and Puerto Rican founder, I also got some insight on who's raising capital and how, and you kind of go through that grind. So for me, it was, and there's multiple layers. So those are the first 3 layers. And first getting into entrepreneurship and getting my feet wet, it was, let me figure out the rules here, and then let's get on the court and see if I can compete.
Yeah, and, for me, I think I always knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur in the back of my mind in some way, shape, or form. My father is an entrepreneur. My mother, along with him, they have a construction company back in New Orleans that's been fairly successful over the years. It's in commercial roofing, not very sexy at all, but it paid better than the oil rig did. So my father made that transition. But he always pushed me into education. And I think as a child, I was always fairly risk averse to begin with. And so I knew that I needed education and experience to sort of give me a certain level of confidence. And, part of the reason that as I was transitioning out of the military, I went into various consulting roles was because I had the idea that, well, if I'm going to run a business one day, I'd like to learn them from the inside out, right? I'd like to learn how to fix their problems and advise business leaders on strategy and on operations and things of that nature. And that way I'm essentially learning how to run many different types of businesses until I figure out exactly what it is I want to do. And when I discovered, tech entrepreneurship and venture capital, that was all about taking risks. And I knew that I had to sort of adopt a different mindset, but also learn that there are ways to make risk mitigated moves, right? Like once kind of to Israel's point, once you learn the rules of the game, then you know how to play. And I think, for the 3 of us, we're all athletes, right? And so the inner athlete in you is kind of like, just give me the ball and let me go figure it out. And the longer my journey sort of went on from different consulting roles and different companies, large, small, et cetera, you just build up a lot of confidence. You're like, I can do this, right? You make your first big sort of public speech. You draft your first legal document. You negotiate a deal, and it turns out well. And you pick a company, and they become successful, and they exit. And you're like, I kind of have the hang of this, I think, right? And then, and then from there it's just reps, and then finally, you make that leap. And I think for me, the sort of catalyzing moment that made me reevaluate my appetite for risk more than any other was last summer and George Floyd's murder. It really made me reevaluate what's important to me, why those things are important, and what I want to do with my life, and to what degree I'm willing to sort of sacrifice my values in order to stay in line, along someone else's line. And so from there, I knew something was going to happen, and it was just a matter of time. And luckily for me, less than 6 months later, this opportunity fell in my lap.
Appreciate that, Zach. Hey, I want to build off something you both Israel and you just kind of referenced, the game, the rules. How do you learn about the rules? I mean, where are these posted somewhere? Like, in all seriousness, I think I asked that jokingly, right? But like, what advice do you give to our participants to help learn those rules, or no matter where you are in this pathway, right? Maybe you know the rules, maybe you don't. Like, how do you stay up to date on all these evolving rules within this world? And Winslow, maybe I'll start with you there. Like, where do you start with these rules? Where do you get to know them?
Well, and that's a really good question, because there are rules to the game, right? And there are rules, and there are times where you need to execute. And there are times the rules really come into play in terms of raising capital, in terms of who to talk to. Now with technology, now you can find certain things on YouTube. I would encourage those who want to know about venture capital to visit the National Venture Capital Association. I think it's www.nvca.org.
Yep.
Because what that does is that you can learn about venture capital. You can learn about what is a term sheet, what are the documents, all the different things that go into raising money. What is a convertible note? When do you need a convertible note? What is a Series A? What is a seed round? What does it mean for a seed round? And so these are some of the things that the good thing is that one isn't born with this type of knowledge. This whole thing of nature versus nurture. Some people are born with creativity, but in this aspect, you can learn this stuff. This stuff is not rocket science. But it's stuff that you can learn, and I'd reach out to those who that you may know and that you may reach out to, and just have a conversation. Take notes, ask as many questions as you need, because there, you learn a lot just by observing too, right? I mean, I think about the fact that just by being in a board meeting, how a board meeting is structured, the Robert Rules of Order, the minutes, how do you dress, where do you sit? I mean, there's so many things that I didn't come from this background, so I didn't have anyone that I could talk to and says, hey, I'm going to a board meeting. How should I dress? What should I wear? What is the process? Where should I sit? Who should I talk to? How do I prepare? And so same thing as being an entrepreneur. Where do I seek money? How do I structure? What is in a board? What is an advisory board? How is equity? What is a cap table? How do you determine a cap table? I mean, there are a whole bunch of questions that can be answered. It's just finding out what to ask. And so that's why a forum like this, and I applaud the work that Management 365 is doing to elevate these sorts of discussions, because it's important to know what you don't know, but also to know what type of question that you need to ask.
And I would just tack on to Winslow's comments. 10 years ago, when Winslow was top of the game, we're still top of the game, and Israel and I were just starting our journeys. This is a very insular industry, right? Very esoteric, where the rules were not widely shared.
Yeah.
They weren't posted, and if you ask someone, they were probably going to be reluctant to give them to you. I think that's changed over time, particularly within the last 2 years. Now, I mean, there are a ton of books, really good books. If you go on to Twitter, there's literally a section of Twitter called VC Twitter, and they're chatting about these terms all the time. There are, tons of boot camps as well. And then most recently, in the last, say, 6 to 12 months, there have been a number of boot camps recently launched specifically on educating Black and brown people on venture capital, on tech entrepreneurship, so that we can participate in this wave of wealth creation and take our shots on goal.
Yeah, I'll second. Google. There's a lot of resources out there. I still Google. I was just Googling last night and this morning on NFTs because I'm really trying to dive into that game. So the resources are there. Advice that I give on the technology side of things, because one of the biggest inequities and really gaps that exist for tech entrepreneurs or aspiring tech entrepreneurs is, how do I learn how to develop technology? I have a great idea. I think it could really change the world, specifically change the community that I come from, but I don't have a friend who's an engineer that can get this idea, this web app standing. And that is a question I get all the time. The current advice that I have, and it's kind of a moving target because we're trying to do some things even in the Equity League to try and solve this problem, is join a tech company, join a startup, try and get involved in any way that you possibly can, so you can see on the inside how that particular company develops and thinks about product design and product development. Get that experience, get that kind of that domain level experience. I see a question here in the comments. I'll just jump on it, Arvind. Is this game and the rules of the game, do they need to be played differently if you're a person of color or minority? Yeah, that's the truth. I mean, I felt like going into VC pitches, I think I had over 500 VC pitches as an entrepreneur. I lost count at 500. 6 of them were to minority VCs. And I felt like every VC pitch I'm going into it down 30 points. And that was after I felt and built up the confidence of having over $1 billion in transactions and feeling like I kind of had a cheat code. And then I got out there and I was like, I'm still brown. I'm still Puerto Rican. And you still have to overcome the implicit bias that exists there, because investment in the VC game, it's all about risk mitigation. So you have VCs that have a portfolio of companies that are all white founders, and they see someone that looks different. The tech could be amazing, you could be amazing, but you're still different. So there's still implicit risk involved. And I think that's one of the biggest problems and inequities that exist. So yes, the game has to be played different. I've told entrepreneurs that, hey, you know what? Your financial projections have to be the most arbitrary of the arbitrary. Like you have to be 5-10 steps ahead to a certain extent in everything you're developing because of risk mitigation. Like you have to overcome those things. So absolutely that exists in our space. You're looking at 2020 in the year of racial enlightenment. The numbers got worse in terms of VC capital distribution. $150 billion in deals. $1 billion of that went to minority founded companies. That's 0.67%. It's terrible, right? That's terrible. So it's definitely a tough game. Entrepreneurship in general is a tough game. You have to overcome that. That'd be my answer. Absolutely. Yeah. Those are good.
And I would add to it, it is, not only is it sort of closed off to us, not only is it, are we not networked into this game, but the game itself is hyper competitive, right? It is, you're talking about big opportunity, big money on the table, and everybody's, gunning for it. So yeah, you have to be a little slicker, a little smoother, a little whatever the case may be, because you'll hear the term in the industry used a lot of pattern matching, right? Part of the risk mitigation is pattern matching. And so they like to see the same things over and over again. Well, it's 2 people in a garage. They both went to Stanford. One of them's an engineer, one of them's a finance. Like they like those patterns. And, I don't know how many of you have ever been to Stanford. There are not many of us at Stanford, and most of us are on the football team. So, breaking into that is difficult, but not impossible. Yeah. And the true name of one of the beautiful parts of the game, I would say, is that it loves disruption. It loves people who say, you know what, forget the rules. I'm going to beat you this way. And so that in and of itself presents its own sort of opportunity.
Yeah. And I would add, in terms of that, if you're a founder and if you're coming up with a new idea, especially, you have to be, as Zach said, it has to be an order of magnitude better than what's out there currently, right? It has to, it cannot be a Me Too technology. And then also you're searching for big markets, larger markets, that if you have a small market, that means that you have to have more of the market share just to be sustainable. But it comes down to, I always ask that to be a good entrepreneur, one, you have to be curious. You have to be curious. You have to go beyond. You have to look at that black box and wonder what's inside. I got to see what's inside. You got to lift the hood of that car and see how the parts work and say, you know what? What if I take this out? What if I make a change to this? I can make this better. 2. And 1 and 2, you have to have perseverance, because a lot of your friends and family who care about you will tell you, I don't think you should do that. Well, why don't you just be like everybody else? I don't want you getting hurt. right? I mean, now they care about you, but it's just more, sometimes they have so much fear that they could be an obstacle. So you have to break out of that and says, you know what, I'm going to try this. Yes. And also, I always say, do not let anyone put you in a box. And you have to, and you also have to not let you put yourself in a box. Just because you're trained in English or trained in science or come from this neighborhood or that neighborhood, there are people that naturally want to say, oh, Israel from Milwaukee, oh, he can only do this. Or Zach from New Orleans, he can only do this. You got to say, nah, that's where yes, I may have been born there, but that's not who I am. Yes, I may have studied this, but I'm not going to put myself in a box. And I'm not going to let you put me in a box. And you need to break out of it. Now, that means that you may have to work harder. You may have to stay up late at night. You may have to study more. You may have to dot all the I's and cross all the T's because it's lonely out front. But if you really want to do it, it can be done. And another thing that what I have come to find that what most people don't realize is that, all the VCs and all the people who run these companies, they're temporary in terms of they have to pass the baton at some point. They can't hold on to it. So the next generation, I mean, I'm being tapped on the shoulder by Israel and Zach, and they're telling me, hey, I know you've been there. Now we're coming up. We're taking over now. I'm saying, I'm not ready to leave yet. And they're like saying, hey, it doesn't work like that. It's time for you to go. And that's true about everything. All these technologies that you see, all these leaders that you see, at some point, they got to pass the baton. But you need to be in that position so that when that shift happens, like Israel said, go to a company and get some experience. Get that experience of how to start a company and volunteer. Be in the critical path. I always tell folks, make sure that you're in the critical path of a technology or something so it goes through you. Yes, it's more work, but that means you know how it works so that when you go off to someplace else, you know the ins and the outs and that you can do things.
Thank you, Izzo. We got I'm going to do a level set. We got about, I think, 20 minutes left, 15, 20 minutes left. So we're going to keep going. But please, all have questions as you're listening in. Please send them in. Let's keep going with them. I want to talk a little bit about the side of this path, right, that we don't always talk about, which is when we fall on our face or when we hit bumps in the road. And I know each of you have, in your path to success, obviously hit bumps in the road. And Winslow, you mentioned perseverance, right? We can only persevere. That for me, perseverance is a true testament and understanding of that. Right? It's okay to fail. It's okay to fail. I don't think any of you all would agree that you like or set out to fail, right? But in order to perceive, you have to accept that failure is part of the process. So, persevere. Then you have to accept that failure is part of the process. So I want you all to talk a little bit about some of that, because it's also a unifying thing. We all fail in our life at some point, and you talked about the number of VC presentations you did, and so maybe I'll start with Zach. Your way, can you talk about maybe some of the specific examples of areas that you didn't have success and what it taught you, what you did after it?
Yeah, I think I'll start with this point. One of the unique things about tech entrepreneurship in particular, I mean, I want to get back to at some point that there are two types of entrepreneurship, right? Not everybody's a fit for venture capital. And I mean, that's kind of where we're leaning towards, but there are multiple forms. But anyway, one of the big sort of ideas in the high growth tech entrepreneurship space is that, failure is good, and, failing fast, right? Try something. If it doesn't work, scrap it, start over, right? And you learn more from your failures than you do from your successes. And, that's true in tech and entrepreneurship. I mean, you hear Kobe Bryant talk about Mamba mentality and that sort of thing. And, I would say, failure in all its many different forms is kind of, reared its ugly head in my career, as far back as the military. And just sort of starting that, what it did for me was help me understand, what I'm good at and it's helped me realize that there are things that we're all sort of uniquely suited to be best in the world that no one else can do, right? And the more you embrace what you're good at and own your lane and not try to be someone else or do what someone else does well, the better traction you get, the longer strides you start to make on your path. And, when I was coming out of business school, everybody wanted to be in, strategy or finance. And it took a while for me to realize that, there are certain types of jobs that I just wasn't good for. I wasn't right for that. I wasn't going to be a spreadsheet junkie. I wasn't going to, I'm good with people, and I need to find roles that allowed me to influence people on a personal basis. And so that's how I kind of, sort of made the journey through, do I want to be an investment banker? Do I want to be in private equity? Do I want to be in venture capital? Right. And understanding the nuances and differences between all those paths, because they're all very different. And accepting that it's okay to not have a job that looks like everybody else's job. And that if you sort of follow opportunity and stick to what you're good at, what people will sort of turn their noses up at the beginning, they'll eventually come back and start to sort of admire. So that was true in going into the military. That was true when I took the job in Kentucky that ultimately turned into a job in Europe. And that was true when I wanted to be in, venture capital and tech, and was taking jobs in Wisconsin and, suburban New York and Ohio instead of in Silicon Valley, because ultimately it prepared me for where I am now. And so, cumulative advantage is a thing, and that's what ultimately helps you leapfrog and get ahead. So I'll stop there. I hope that answered the question to some degree.
Yeah. Winslow, I'm interested in hearing from you. Now I'll go after, but what do you got?
Well, I think with regard to fair, I told the story about the first startup, and it went from 0 to 900 million in 2.5 years. And so what people don't realize is that the first when we developed the first chip, after the first year, we went out and raised money and had a great valuation. And all the VCs thought that, okay, great, this is a done deal. You have all the risks have mitigated. Now you're just going to go to a product. And I was asked by my colleagues to put in some new features within the technology, and I did. And it made sense. And I did all the analysis, and I ran all simulations, and I did the design on the silicon. Well, when the chip came back, it was dead on arrival. It wasn't working at all. And I later found out that our models were wrong. Models that we did for design was wrong. And all of a sudden, the VCs who were so happy with the company, they turned on the company, and they basically said, you got a burn rate, you got 10 months to a year before you burn out of cash. No one's traveling at all. We got to get this done. And then all of a sudden, my co-founders, who, we were all in this together, the old expression that says, success has many fathers, but failure is an orphan. Well, when everything was going well, it was like we did it. But when things were going bad, it was he did it. It was me. And I didn't know how to take this. And so what I did is that rather than, channel this energy, well, I didn't sleep well. I stayed up late at night. I just kind of brute force. I'm going to just stay and just to get this thing working. And I didn't take care of my health. I didn't exercise, and I came down with a bad case of bronchitis, and it wasn't treated at all. And it got worse and worse. And then finally, some of the folks at the office said, you really need to go to a doctor because you're barking. And so when I went to the doctor, he was alarmed because I only had like 30% lung capacity. He was like, man, he wanted to admit me right away. And for the next 2 years, I didn't go anywhere without my albuterol in the inhaler, the albuterol, because I had an asthma attack, and so I found that under stress, I wasn't taking care of myself, and I almost died. Mm. And so it's very important to know the whole story. Yes, there was a great outcome, but on the way to a great outcome, I almost died because of all the stress. And so what I've learned is that in this game, especially men of color, we tend to have more stress because we feel the whole world is looking at us, right? That if we fail, we're carrying the weight of the world on our shoulders. And so after that experience, I refuse to carry the whole weight of the black race or the brown race or whatever. We cannot get into that because that's too much to bear. And, failure is a part of success. In venture capital, we used to say that VCs, they bury their dead very quietly. So you'll hear a VC who will talk about their success, but they won't talk about their failures. And so failure is part of success. And so that's something that I've learned throughout this journey.
Amazing. Thanks for sharing that, Winslow. I think for me, brings like the importance of mental health, right? Like the depression rates in entrepreneurship are just outrageous. And I think for minority individuals and really minority men, we all struggle with it. We're afraid to talk about it, right? We're generally, culturally, we're too prideful to talk about these types of things. So that's one of the biggest problems. But it's something that as I kind of honed in on getting better and better and better, one of the things I really focused on was just trying to stay even keel. Remember early on in the entrepreneurial days, you kind of you close your first deal, you're calling your girlfriend about it, you're calling whoever, and you're just super hyped up about it. And then you lose the next 9 deals and you're in the gutter. And then you finally, you go on this up and down and up and down. And what I tell early stage entrepreneurs is score touchdowns like you've been there before. When you score your first touchdown, be Barry Sanders, act like you've been there before, because you're going to fumble the next time you get the ball. It's just going to happen. It's part of the game that we're playing. So stay even keel and manage your mental health and make that part of your business model. That I do now. All the entrepreneurs and the companies that we'll be investing in. Tell me about what you're doing for yourself and your team to benefit your own mental health and your team's mental health. I force them to make it part of their business model. It's so crucial.
I love that, Israel. I mean, if you don't change and you don't ask, then people aren't responding in the way that you hope that they do. One of the things we do at the Bucks in our foundation grant process, right? Listen, I think we can all see in our nonprofit community, there's a lot of different silos that exist. So one of the basic questions that I ask is, and we ask, who else are you partnering with when you ask for this grant money? And so if you're not intentional, right, I think is what I bring it back to. If you're not intentional about focusing on your mental health or asking about it, then I don't think then we get to a point where we can be comfortably speaking about that. So I appreciate that, Israel. And to Winslow and Zach, thank you for sharing your experiences there as well. I want to ask one more kind of question, and I hope I've allowed enough time for this before I kind of weave into our closing remarks. But listen, I think there's this path, right? Starting off as an entrepreneur and correct me if I'm wrong, y'all, getting to the world of being a VC, right? Is that the end game, so to speak, in this game that we speak to? And if so, how do you get to that end game? And you all are kind of maybe living proof of that pathway. So if you don't mind talking a little bit about the VC world and any advice you can share, that'd be great too. Maybe we'll start, Israel. We'll start with you.
Yeah, I'll jump in on that. I mean, for me personally, the end game was always to be a VC at the end of the day. Kind of once you learn the tech game, you're on it on the entrepreneurial side. For me, I was like, man, the entrepreneurial side is great. If I can get an exit, if I can sell a company, that'd be great. But I think the end game is I want to be investing in companies and I want to be kind of that, on that side. And for me, I always thought that I'd have to sell a company for $100 million at least, plus to get into that. And luckily, and I say luckily, literally luckily, I was able to get this opportunity to be on the VC side of the game. Because the reality is, to be in VC, you basically have to go to Wharton, Stanford, Harvard, get an MBA, probably be white, know someone in the game, and then get an opportunity as a venture fellow and then maybe a venture associate And the nepotism in the space is just, it's unreal. And you're looking at like 96% of the decision makers in VC are white, are Caucasian. So for minority individuals getting in VC, it's incredibly difficult. The advice that I say, is for any listeners, connect with us. First off, like that's the first key. Build your network, connect with individuals that are in the space, see how you can get in, and learn the game. Read. There's a question here that I'll answer in this answer is, what book do I suggest? Venture Deals is like one of my go-to books. Bradley Feld, right? If you're in this game and you haven't read Venture Deals, it's probably a problem. So read Venture Deals by Bradley Feld. That's kind of like the Mr. T starter kit to getting in this game and your first couple gold chains. But I'll stop there. I want to Zach and Winslow give their advice on how getting into this game. But it's really difficult. First off, it's incredibly difficult, incredibly competitive. You likely have to have some form of success to even really get, you're not going to come from nothing. Be like, I want to be a VC, and then people are going to open the doors. It just doesn't work like that. So you have to figure out what success means for you. Maybe you have to become a, domain and industry expert in a particular space, build your name, build your brand out, make connections, and get your foot in the door. But it's difficult. And hopefully things will be changing. At the Equity League, we're very passionate about trying to change the space. So please, any listeners, reach out to me or anyone on the team. We'll chat with you. Promise.
Yeah, definitely reach out. Echo everything Israel said. Venture Deals is the Bible of the venture capital world. So if you want to start anywhere, start there. And if you decide that it's for you, man, the energy needed to sort of stay the course is tremendous, because you'll see, as you get into the culture, you'll see people posting on Twitter and Clubhouse and all these places like, oh, I'm doing this, or I've got a fund, or I've done this, that, and the third. And there's a lot of hype. Not all of it's real. But one of my favorite quotes is from Mark Cuban. It says, it takes 10 years to become an overnight success. And, never sort of doubt your journey or what someone else's journey is, because, if someone else is grinding in the background and, in order to break in, day one is that's not the end game, because you still got to return capital. You got to be a successful VC, right? If you can't return capital and make good investments and nurture those investments and make money for your investors, it's just another job, and it can be a very high pressure job that you get kicked out of very quickly.
So end of the game, right?
That's right. In all the wrong ways.
This is 365 Media.